They will tell you, I was a general. I was not a general. I was 26 years old and I had never commanded anything larger than my own fear. I came because Proxenus asked me. Proxenus, who was my friend from the years when we were both young enough to believe that going to war was the same thing as understanding it. He wrote to me in Athens. He said there would be glory. He said the pay was good. He said Cyrus the Younger was a man worth following, and that a man who followed him would see things worth seeing. He did not say what kind of things. I packed a soldier's kit and a philosopher's habit, the questions I could not stop asking, the notebook I had carried since Socrates first told me to look at what was in front of me and stop looking away. I was not a soldier. I was a student who had gotten on the wrong horse at the wrong moment in history, and I rode it all the way to Persia. Cunaxa is a place in Babylon, between the Euphrates and the desert. 401 BC, September. The 10,000 Greeks, who had marched 1,000 miles to put Cyrus on the Persian throne, formed up on the right wing as they had always formed up. Shields locked, spears forward, the phalanx doing what the phalanx does. They broke the Persian left. They broke it completely. They pursued so far they could no longer see the rest of the battle. When they turned around, Cyrus was dead. He had charged the center himself, directly at his brother Artaxerxes. He had come within arm's reach of killing him, and then he was dead. The 10,000 had won their part of the battle. The war was over. The prince they had crossed half the world to crown had bled out somewhere in the dust of Cunaxa, and nobody had told us. I remember standing in formation when the news arrived. I remember the sound of it moving through the ranks, not shouting, not crying, the sound that men make when they understand something that cannot be undone. A kind of low settling, like a structure that has lost its foundation and has not yet decided to fall. Tissaphernes sent an envoy. He said there was no need for more fighting. He said we could negotiate. He said our generals should come to his camp for a meeting and that we would all find a way through this together. Clearchus went. Proxenus went. 4 other generals went. I did not go. I do not know why. I was not wise enough to understand what was happening. I was simply not the kind of man who had been invited. They were all killed that night. Not in battle. At a dinner. Their heads were taken to Artaxerxes. Proxenus was 30 years old. That is what the record says. What the record does not say is what happened in the hours after. What it costs a man to hear that his friend, who invited him on this adventure, who wrote the letter that put him on this road, who laughed with him in Athens over wine and the promise of what was coming. What it costs a man to hear that friend is a severed head in the tent of a Persian satrap. What it costs a man to stand in a camp of 10,000 soldiers, none of them Athenians, none of them his people, all of them looking around for someone to tell them what to do next. That is where this story begins. Not at Cunaxa. In the night after. I did not sleep. I do not think anyone slept. The fires were lower than they should have been. Nobody wanted to feed them. Nobody wanted to draw attention. As if Tissaphernes did not already know exactly where we were. 10,000 Greeks in the Babylonian plain. There is not a great deal of hiding available. I sat with my back against a wagon wheel and I did what I had learned to do from Socrates. I looked at what was in front of me and I stopped looking away. What was in front of me? 10,000 soldiers. No generals. 1,500 miles from the sea. The sea being the only thing that could get us home. Tissaphernes to the south with an army that had just watched us fight and now knew exactly how we fought. The Euphrates to the west, desert to the east. The arithmetic was not complicated. It was only brutal. I had a stylus somewhere in my pack. I had been taking notes since we crossed into Persia. The names of rivers, the distances between camps, the quality of the water, the behavior of cavalry on open ground. I had written down everything Clearchus said, because Clearchus was a man worth writing down. I had written down the faces of men I did not know because I could not stop watching faces. I was not a soldier. I was a man who could not stop taking notes about soldiers. I pulled out the stylus. I did not write anything. I sat with it in my hand, and I thought about home. Athens is a city that smells of olive oil and argument. My father's house was on a lane near the agora, close enough to hear the market open in the morning, far enough that the noise was a rumor rather than a fact. I grew up listening to men disagree. I grew up believing that disagreement was the highest form of conversation, that the man who could survive being wrong in public was stronger than the man who was never challenged. Socrates taught me that. He taught me by doing it to me. He walked up to me when I was 17. I was carrying something, I do not remember what, and he blocked my path and asked me where good things came from. I said I did not know. He said neither did he. He said that was the right answer and I should come find him tomorrow. I came back every day for 7 years. He asked me about courage, about justice, about whether a man who does the right thing for the wrong reason is a good man or a bad one. I did not know then that he was teaching me something practical. I thought he was teaching me philosophy. He was teaching me how to think when everything else has been taken away. Somewhere near the 3rd hour of night, a man sat down beside me. His name was Cheirisophus. Spartan. He commanded the Lacedaemonian contingent, about 700 men. He was older than me by 10 years, and he had the kind of face that had been in weather for a long time. He did not say anything when he sat down. He just sat. After a while, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Thinking." He said, "About what?" I said, "About whether there is a way through this." He looked at the fire for a long time. Then he said, "Is there?" I did not answer immediately. I had learned from Socrates that the answer you give without thinking is usually the answer you give to stop being uncomfortable. The real answer takes longer. I said, "I think there might be one way." He said, "Tell me." I said, "We march north." He said nothing. I said, "Tissaphernes expects us to negotiate. He expects us to send envoys and ask for terms and slowly disintegrate while we wait for an answer that never comes. He expects us to behave like a defeated army. We are not a defeated army. We won our part of the battle. We are an army without a destination. That is a different thing." He looked at me for a long time. He said, "You are not a general." I said, "I know." He said, "You have never commanded men." I said, "I know that too." He said, "Why should I listen to you?" I said, "Because everyone else who might have had a better answer went to a dinner they should not have attended." He was quiet again. Then he said, "How far to the sea?" I said, 1,500 miles, maybe more. I have been writing down the distances. I have some of them. He said, "Mountains?" I said, "Yes, the Carduchian Mountains in the north, then Pontus, then the Black Sea and the Greek cities on its coast." He said, "Winter?" I said, "Also yes." He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "You should talk to the men." I said, "I am 26 years old. I am from Athens. I am not a soldier." He said, "You are the one who is talking about a way through. That makes you the one who talks to the men." I thought about running. I want to be honest about this because the record will not be. I thought about it for a long time that night. I was not Spartan. I had no training that told me dying in place was preferable to surviving any way available. I was Athenian. I was educated. I was young. I had parents who did not know where I was. I had a city I had left on a horse because a friend wrote me a letter. I could have found a way. In the chaos of 10,000 men trying to understand what had just happened to them, one man who moved quietly in the right direction could have disappeared. Into the desert, north along the river. Something. The arithmetic of one man surviving is simpler than the arithmetic of 10,000 men surviving. I thought about it, and then I thought about Proxenus. Proxenus, who was dead, who had been my friend, who had gone to a dinner because he believed that reasonable men could find a reasonable settlement, and had been killed for that belief while I sat against a wagon wheel and thought about running. I thought about what Socrates would say. He would ask me a question. He would not tell me what to do. He would ask me something that made the answer unavoidable. The question he would ask, "If you leave, what do you become?" Not what happens to you. What you become. I knew the answer. I put the stylus back in my pack. I stood up. I spoke to the army at dawn. I did not have authority to call an assembly. I was not a general. I was not Spartan. I was not even a soldier in any formal sense. I was a 26-year-old Athenian who had come on this expedition because he was curious. I stood in front of 10,000 men and I told them the truth. I told them the generals were dead. I told them we were 1,500 miles from the sea, and the sea was the only way home. I told them Tissaphernes would not negotiate in good faith. The evidence for this was the heads of our generals. I told them we could not go south. We could not go west. We could not stay. I told them we could go north. I told them I did not know if we would make it. I told them the mountains would be bad, and the winter would be worse, and the Carduchians, who lived in those mountains, were not friendly to anyone who entered their territory. I told them I had been keeping notes, and I knew some of the distances and some of the terrain, but not all of it. I told them that the men who had the full answer were dead, and the men who were alive only had partial answers, and that partial answers were what we had to work with. I told them that dying in place was a choice, and marching north was a choice, and the only choice I was not willing to make was the one where we stopped moving. The army was quiet for a long time. Then Cheirisophus said, "I will march." Then others said it. Then it was not a question anymore. We marched for 6 months. I will not tell you it was what I expected, because I had not known what to expect. I had never been on a campaign in winter. I had never crossed a mountain range in snow. I had never watched men lose toes to cold and keep walking, because stopping was not an option. I had never had to decide who carried the sick and who left them. I had never sent men to their deaths as a calculation, and known it was the right calculation and gone to sleep afterward, and woken up and made the same calculation again. I kept taking notes. That was the only continuity. The stylus and the notebook. Everything else changed. The terrain, the enemy, the season, the number of men behind me. The notes stayed. I wrote down the name of every river we crossed. The Centrites, the Teleboas, the Phasis, the Harpasus. I wrote down the names because I knew that if we made it home, someone would need to know what this road looked like. Someone would need to know that it was possible. Someone would need to know the distances and the mountain passes and the places where the water was good and the places where it was not. I wrote it down because Socrates had taught me that the most important thing a man can do with an experience is not survive it. The most important thing is to understand it well enough to pass it on. The Carduchian mountains took more men than any battle. The cold took more than the Carduchians. There is a moment in the mountains. It happens to every man. I watched it happen to 10,000 men in sequence, where the body stops being interested in the mission. The body has one interest only: warmth. The body will accept almost any cost to return to warmth, including the cost of lying down in the snow and not getting up. The mind has to overrule the body. I do not know how to teach this. I only know that it can be done, because I watched it done, over and over, by men who had every reason to stop. The man beside me on the worst day of the mountain crossing was a Theban hoplite named Episthanes. He had been with the expedition since before I joined it. He had survived Cunaxa and the dinner and the desert and the first weeks of the march. He was not young. He had a wife somewhere and children he had stopped mentioning because mentioning them hurt more than not mentioning them. On the worst day, he stopped walking. Not because he was injured, because he had run out of the thing that makes a man keep walking. I stopped beside him. He said, "I cannot." I said, "You can." He said, "You don't know that." I said, "I know that you are still standing. A man who cannot walk does not stand first." He looked at me. He said, "That is not philosophy." I said, "It is the only philosophy that works up here." He started walking again. I wrote his name down that night. Trapezus, February 400 BC. The Black Sea. I do not know how to describe what it felt like to see it. I have tried in the Anabasis, and I do not think I succeeded. The word I used was thalata, the sea, because that is what the men shouted when they saw it from the ridge, before I saw it myself. I heard it first as a sound moving back through the column, 10,000 voices saying the same two syllables, and I did not understand what was happening until I reached the ridge and saw what they had seen. Water. Greek water. The Black Sea, with Greek cities on its far shore and Greek ships in its harbours. I stood on that ridge for a long time. I thought about Proxenus. I thought about the letter he wrote me. The letter that started this. The part where he said there would be glory and the pay was good, and Cyrus was a man worth following. He was not wrong about Cyrus. He was not wrong about the glory either, though it was not the kind of glory either of us had imagined when we were young men in Athens, talking about what glory might look like. He did not make it to the sea. I made it to the sea for both of us. I went home. Athens did not welcome me. I had served under a Persian prince against a Persian king, and Athens and Persia had complicated feelings about each other, and I was exiled. I went to Sparta instead. I was given an estate at Scylla near Olympia. I built a temple to Artemis because I had made a vow to her somewhere in the mountains when I was not sure I would survive. I wrote the Anabasis. I wrote it in the third person. Xenophon did this. Xenophon decided that, as if I were writing about a stranger. As if the man who had stood in front of 10,000 soldiers at dawn and told them the truth about their situation was someone I was watching from a distance, taking notes about, trying to understand. Maybe that is the only way to write about yourself. Maybe the distance is the only way to see it clearly. I still have the notebook, not the original. It did not survive the mountains, but the copy I made at Trapezus, when we had time and shelter, and I could reconstruct from memory what the original had contained. The names of rivers, the distances between camps, the quality of water, the names of men, Episthanes of Thebes, who stopped in the snow and started again, Cheirisophus of Sparta, who sat beside me against a wagon wheel and asked me if there was a way through, Proxenus of Boeotia, who wrote a letter and did not come home. The stylus is still the same one. I have never replaced it. I do not know why I kept it. I know only that I did, and that on the nights when I am old and the estate is quiet and the olive trees outside the temple are still, I take it out and I hold it, and I think about the wagon wheel, the cold ground, the low fire, the arithmetic of 1,500 miles, and the moment when I stopped thinking about running